Should have a copy of my proposed changes to paragraphs 2 and 3 of the email from Mr. Robles' office regarding limiting instructions. Basically, I think it's easier to comprehend if you have something to look at, so I asked Mr. Rahman to make sure that their proposed instruction was submitted so it can be kept with the record. And I'm not 100% sure that they're appropriate as I've proposed, but it seemed to me a way to capture the defendant's concerns without confusing the jury with regard to the actual elements of justifiable homicide by a public officer and the elements of justifiable homicide in defense of another. Do you all have that?
Yes, Judge. And we will have the weekend to look it over and we can come talk on Tuesday again?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Can I just ask one question there? Just to be the second paragraph to be consistent with the first one, instead of the second paragraph using the word irrelevant, can we use the words not relevant?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I was just...
I understand, but...
I'm not wedded to any of this. Like I said, I'm not even sure if I'm not 100% sure that technically it's correct, but it appears to me that, I said it before, under 5173, if the jury follows that instruction, if it goes to the jury, those elements will determine when deadly force is justified. And there is no element with regard to the reasonableness of deadly force. You said it before, based on my understanding of the statute and the instruction, if the facts support the finding that there was, the officers were overcoming the actual resistance of Mr. Boyd, and they also, not quoting the elements instruction, but basically that they reasonably believed that there was a threat of death or big public harm, then that equals a necessary homicide. So that's the reason why I think we have to be careful about adding an additional element that is not in the jury instruction that was approved by the Supreme Court. But I understand why less lethal tools would not, why less lethal tools in that argument might apply to 5172, justified homicide and defense of another, based on, I believe, it's element 3 of that instruction. So if you're prepared Tuesday to talk about it, we'll find time on Tuesday. Monday, we're going to be in recess with regard to this case. Anything before the jury brought in?
Yes, Judge. I don't have the case law with me, but what keeps happening in the questions that Mr. Brigman does is that he injects the lawyers into the case, like he did with the questions there on cross about saying, Ms. McGinn says this, and what do you think about that? And the problem with injecting the lawyers in the case and criticizing the lawyers, if I was doing that in front of the jury, he'd have yet another grounds, in addition to the Kennedy assassination, to put for me to be held in contempt of court or sanctioned. But that's improper because I'm not allowed to stand up and defend myself or say anything. And it is improper to inject the lawyers into the case, and he continues to do it, both in the way he asked the question, did you hear opening, so you didn't hear Ms. McGinn say, and so what it does is not allow me to stand up and testify. And he's making me like I have to testify to defend myself, and I think that's improper, and I'd ask the court to make him stop doing that, please.
I understand the state's argument, and so, Mr. Bregman, what I want for you to do, I understand that you're trying to establish what the facts actually support. I think you can do that without referencing in opening statement, did you hear Ms. McGinn say? You know, you can do it in a way that doesn't include Ms. McGinn.
I'll do it without mentioning Ms. McGinn.
And just reference to what the facts support in this case. So does that satisfy your concern, Ms. McGinn?
Yes, it does, Your Honor. Thank you.
So we'll bring in the jury then.
Your Honor, would you like the witness to approach?
Sure, yeah.
Your Honor, if you'd like to switch it to prosecution, that'd be great.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Please rise. Thank you. May be seated. Please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth on the council's law?
I do, Your Honor.
Thank you. May be seated. Please state your name for the record and spell it as well.
David Hubbard,
Can you spell your last name?
Hubbard.
Thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Brooks.
Mr. Hubbard, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now, and again, it's me and maybe some others who may not be able to hear as well as we once did. If you could just scoot up to the microphone when giving your testimony, that would certainly help me. I appreciate that.
Certainly.
Now, you're here to testify about the training that you gave to Officer Dominique Perez, is that right?
That's correct.
What I'd like to do now is to cover your background and experience briefly and bring us to the point in which you were providing Officer Perez training when he was a cadet in the Albuquerque Police Department Academy. First, when did you join the Albuquerque Police Department?
in 1991.
And why did you decide to become a police officer?
It was a lifelong passion of mine.
Now, would you please describe the sort of the various assignments you have had during the course of your career so that we can understand the experience you've had as an Albuquerque Police Department officer?
Certainly. I started in the field like everybody else does. In 1997, I entered the APD SWAT team for about 7 years until 2003. Then I promoted to sergeant. I worked a field squad for a couple years. Then I was recruited in, it was probably about 2005 to take over as sergeant of the APD rope team. And from that unit, I retired.
Now, there came a point in time in which you became an instructor, is that right?
Correct.
Would you please explain the process by which a police officer can become an instructor who trains other officers?
Certainly. One of the primary things needed is you need to go through a teaching program that teaches you to instruct. And that is done through the Department of Public Safety, through the state, and it's also done through the Department of Energy on a federal level. And I have both of those certifications.
Now, how did it come to pass that you ended up teaching a class called Edge Weapons Awareness?
Some of the people I knew who were running the training academy for Albuquerque Police knew that I had been involved in the martial arts most of my life. And they approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to do this class, and I told them of course I would. So I did a lot of research on it. I had already gone through a course by an individual named Steve Tarani, who put together a class specifically for police on dealing with edged weapons and contact weapons, which would be anything including like baseball bats or pool cues coming at you besides empty hands.
Who is Steve Tarani?
He is an instructor, and he's, I believe, out of Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm not sure about that. But he travels around and he teaches police departments, correctional facilities, basically how to deal with edged weapons when you're in such a close proximity that you don't have time to go to a lethal option to where it's just pure hands against knife.
Now, to the best of your understanding, what is the process by which a class such as Edge Weapons Awareness is approved by the New Mexico Department of Public Safety?
It's submitted, the course curriculum is submitted to the State Department of Public Safety, and they approve it or deny it.
Now, there came a point in time in which you became an adjunct instructor with the Albuquerque Police Department Basic Academy, is that correct?
Correct, yeah. I was just a part-time where I would come in when they had a new class of cadets, and I would teach this 3-hour block of instruction to them. And then I would go back to my regular duties. I wasn't working at the academy.
Now, how many years did you teach this class entitled Edge Weapons Awareness?
I taught from about 2000 through 2011 when I retired, and I taught 1 or 2 classes even after I retired.
Now, there came a point in time in which you came to learn that Officer Dominic Perez was a student of one of your classes, is that correct?
Yes, I didn't know he was a student of mine, but given the years that I taught, yes, he was a student.
Okay. Now, after Officer Perez graduated from the Albuquerque Police Department Academy, you came to know him, is that correct?
That's actually not true. I never really knew him. The first time I really recognized him was in the preliminary hearing on this matter.
Now, turning your attention to the class that you taught,
yes.
Would you please explain what the goal of the Edge Weapon Awareness course was?
The goal of the Edge Weapon Awareness class, just like the name implies, is to give a sense of the threat an edge weapon poses to a police officer in the city of Albuquerque. Most people coming into the academy are pretty unaware of the damage that a knife can do and the threat that it poses.
Now, what kind of items do you teach can be used as edge weapons?
It's a lethal injury.
Does it matter how an edge weapon is being held in terms of its ability to cause harm?
There are two basic ways of holding a knife, if you will, and that's a forward grip where the blade is coming out on the thumb side, or a reverse grip where it's coming out on the back side. And there's advantages and disadvantages for an attacker with each of those holding methods.
Now, what did you teach about the various ways in which a person can attack with an edge weapon?
I taught a very simple system because I was only allotted 3 hours for this class. So it had to be distilled down from some of the Filipino fighting arts have like 12 angles of attack, and they're very complex, and these systems are studied by people for their entire lifetime. So I had 3 hours. So I distilled this down to a very basic system of 5 angles of attack that they had to deal with, which summarized everything that they would be dealing with. And the practical applications that we went through were at literally arm's reach, where somebody is attacking them with an edged weapon, and they have to create distance between them and the other person.
Now, a portion of your class is devoted to individuals who are known as emotionally disturbed persons. Is that right?
That's correct.
What did you teach your students about emotionally disturbed persons and the relationship they have with edged weapons?
The first hour of the class I taught was watching a video called Surviving Edged Weapons. And in that video, they talk about the dangers of dealing with emotionally disturbed people. And the bottom line in dealing with these kind of people is the unpredictability of their actions. They can be your best friend 1 second and in the next minute trying to kill you. It's totally irrational and totally unpredictable.
At this time, Your Honor, I would like to play a portion of what has been marked Officer Perez's Exhibit J from the video entitled Surviving Edged Weapons, and we would play minute 55 and 8 seconds to 57 minutes and 22 seconds. And after we've shown the video, I'd like to ask some questions.
If he goes mobile at some point, this EDP with a knife in his right hand is standing in front of his home. Officers are keeping their distance and trying to talk him down. As he becomes more agitated, 3 of the officers draw their sidearms, trying to contain him in a semicircle. Now he starts running down the sidewalk. The officer on the left waits with his baton. At the corner, the suspect still holds his knife in the ice pick grip and threatens to kill. Is the officer at a safe distance? He decides not to shoot, but would he have been justified in shooting? Or would you have waited and continued talking? 7 officers chase the suspect on foot. Here they circle the suspect again. He broke free and ran 2 more blocks, then crashed through the front window of a house. When he started attacking a resident inside, officers fired 6 shots, which finally stopped him. When you're threatened with an edged weapon, your appropriate force response ideally begins with your sidearm ready. Edged weapons are instruments of deadly force, and whenever possible, you must be prepared to use your ultimate force option if necessary. Whether you actually have to use deadly force will depend on the suspect's action. Think in terms of a 3-part formula. Intent. Do the suspect's words and actions convince you that he means to kill or cause serious or lethal bodily harm to you or someone else? Does the threat here seem imminent? Yes, it does. Another element that must be present is a weapon. Some instrument with which he is capable of carrying out his deadly intent. That's present here, too. A third element is a delivery system. Does he have the means of getting the impact of that edged weapon from him to you to fulfill his intent? Here, the suspect is simply activating his delivery system. When intent, weapon, and delivery system are present, and the threat is imminent, you are justified in using deadly force.
Now, did you teach the way of looking at whether a person who is armed with an edged weapon is a deadly threat with the terms intent, weapon, and delivery system?
Yes. Different police departments use different terms, different acronyms, but it all boils down to the same thing.
How did you relate that to the Albuquerque Police Department use of force SOP, and so that officers understood that what was important was the Albuquerque Police Department use of force SOP as opposed to what they saw in the video?
Yeah, we went through the department SOP and how they phrased it, and how it refers back to this video and the principles in there.
Would you please explain how you did that with your students?
We stopped the video at various places, and we stopped the video at the end of this, and we discussed intent. Does this guy have the intent to cause death or great bodily harm to somebody? And due to his mannerisms, how he's holding the knife, it becomes obvious that he did have the intent.
And how do you teach the terms, like, for example, means and opportunity?
Means and opportunity are the same as the terms discussed in the video. Means is, does he have a weapon? Somebody can have the intent to do death or great bodily harm to somebody, but if they don't have a weapon system or are not physically capable, then they don't have the means. Opportunity basically boils down to distance. If somebody has a knife, but they're 3 miles away, they really don't have the opportunity to hurt you. They could have the intent and the means, but they wouldn't have the opportunity.
Now, there's also another topic that you taught the students who were in your courses, and that's called the reactionary gap. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, did you also use the surviving edge weapons video to explain the reactionary gap?
Yes, there's an excellent part of that video which very graphically demonstrates the reactionary gap and the importance of it.
I'd like to play a portion of Exhibit J, Officer Perez's Exhibit J, from Surviving Edge Weapons, and that portion will be played from the 40-minute 47 mark to the 43-minute 10-second mark.
Many officers, like the one on the left, really believe if they're close to the action, they're in control. But this attitude disregards the proxemics of the situation. That's the relationship between distance and the threat level produced by the weapon present. A common problem whether there's one officer involved or the whole shift. What about officers responding on the street below this offender? Are they too close to his gun threat? They're ignoring the concept of the reactionary gap, the distance you need from a potential threat to defend yourself if an attack is launched. For firearms assaults, a reactionary gap can be a half mile or more if good cover isn't available. To defend yourself against assaults from hands and feet, you need a reactionary gap of about 10 feet. Most officers think that's good enough for edged weapons too. But this unrehearsed training exercise shows just how fast a knife offender can shrink your reactionary gap. Here, officers have been told to investigate suspicious circumstances at night in a warehouse and react to what they find. At first glance, this officer's distance from the suspect looks safe enough. But an attacker can easily cover this distance faster than most officers can draw their guns. Remember, when you close the distance between yourself and the suspect, do so only by purposeful decision. In fact, at close distances, your only realistic option for controlling a suspect is empty hand tactics. Yet when officers are asked how they would control a knife attacker, they usually say, "I'd shoot him," forgetting that they may not have time to in reality. Here, still unrehearsed, is what really happens when officers assume they can automatically use deadly force against a knifer. They stand their ground and try to draw. Or try to draw and disengage simultaneously. Or even worse, try to draw, fall down, and shoot. And they lose. Because time and distance work for the offender and against the officer.
Now, how would you use this portion of the video to explain or how would you use it to demonstrate the reactionary gap to your students?
Well, I think it's very self-explanatory. You know, it shows the reactionary gap is the distance you need to be able to react to a deadly threat safely. Okay, that's what the reactionary gap is. And on this video, it shows very graphically how important that is.
Why is it I'm sorry?
When people are coming into the academy, typically they're very unaware of these distances of where they can be hurt inside these distances. And it's not an absolute, like the 21-foot drill that you've heard about, I'm sure. It's not absolute. It's not black and white that you draw a line in the sand and I'm safe back here and I'm not safe in front of that. It all depends on the scenario, which is very flexible.
Now, why do you say that students coming into or I should say police cadets who are learning to become police officers are unaware of these dangers that exist with regard to the reactionary gap?
Almost every cadet coming into the academy has never faced a very violent offender who's intent on killing them.
And why does that matter?
Because they need to develop that survival mindset in those situations, because humans react differently in dangerous situations like that. Sometimes they just freeze. Sometimes there's a very delayed response. So by discussing these things in a classroom situation and going through some drills, it helps ingrain in them to react and not just sit there like a deer in the headlights.
Now, in the class that you teach, what do you teach about the importance of seeing hands?
We definitely discuss the importance of watching hands. Basic officer survival skills are you always watch an offender's hands. If you can't see his hands, you have to assume he's got something in him, and it's something that's going to hurt you. The hands are what hurts you. That's sort of a saying that we go through when we're in our training. Watch the hands. The hands are what can hurt you.
Now, there's this other topic that's been discussed in this case, and I believe it's been discussed in your class, and that's the tool-year drill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would you please explain what the tool-year drill is?
The tool-year drill was done by, I think, an officer in Salt Lake City, and he went to a firing range, and he had one person standing facing a target, and he would pick different distances, and he would have somebody run up to that individual, simulating an attack from the side so that that person wouldn't get shot. But that way he could figure out the reactionary gap, if you will, in the time period that it would take an individual with a knife to get to an officer with a holstered weapon prior to him being able to get off 2 rounds at a target. So what this came down to was this 21-foot drill where this was averaged out in this fairly sterile environment where, okay, from 21 feet, if a subject pulls out a knife and charges you and you've got a holstered weapon, you're possibly going to be able to get off those 2 rounds in time.
Now, why did you mention the word sterile environment? Why does it matter to actually, how does this tool-year drill that's done in a sterile environment, how does it relate to the real world?
Well, like many drills in a classroom situation, they're done in a very low-stress, sterile environment where there aren't obstacles, barriers in your way, anything you can trip over, anything like that.
Now, what role does stress play in the real world in dealing with individuals who are dangerous felons?
It's a huge factor. What they prove time and time again is your accuracy and your fine motor skills go out the window when you're in a high-stress environment. That's why in training we try and focus on gross motor skills. And in the drills the unarmed against a knife drills that I would take my students through are very gross motor skills. There's no fine movement of having to grab a person's wrist and control a weapon. It's very large muscle groups that are being taken into action so that in a stress reaction, they're still able to perform these skills proficiently.
Now, there's a portion of the Surviving Edge weapons video that demonstrates the tool-year drill. Is that correct?
Yes, there is.
And at this time, Your Honor, I'd like to play a portion of Exhibit J, and that would be from 43 minutes, 38 seconds to 44 minutes, 45 seconds.
At about 10 feet, you might get your sidearm out, but you probably won't get a shot off. A suspect with a knife can close 7 paces and deliver deadly force in less than 1 1/2 seconds. For the average officer to deliver 2 rounds against an attacker who starts moving at 10 feet, the sidearm must already be drawn and ready to shoot. At about about 15 feet, your chances get a little better if you're alert, anticipate danger, and are skilled with your equipment. But to deliver 2 rounds center of mass, your hand would already have to be on your sidearm when the attack begins. Tests with hundreds of officers reveal that in most cases, a minimum reactionary gap of 21 feet is required to react and deliver at least 2 rounds, and to have enough time to move out of the attacker's path.
How do you use this video in teaching your students about the 21-foot rule?
Well, obviously it very graphically depicts how the 21-foot rule works, and it does it in such a way that's more descriptive than doing a demonstration, and that's why I preferred to do the video here.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that there are real-world situations. I'd like to ask this question. What do you teach your students about the reality of the 21-foot rule in the real world?
What I teach is that it's not a rule. There are no absolutes out in the real world. Everything's black and white, in the classroom or a courtroom, but out in the real world, there's no absolutes. Every scenario is completely different, and it's hard to evaluate a scenario from a video, if you will. If you're there, there's the rocks on the ground, there's the wind blowing where you can't hear, there's all kinds of more interfering factors that can enter the situation.
What do you teach your students about the importance of distance?
Well, this video very graphically demonstrates the importance of distance in creating that reactionary gap between you and a suspect so that you do have time to react and protect yourself and others.
Now, what do you teach your cadets, your aspiring officers, about how to essentially close the distance on a suspect who may be armed with an edge weapon?
I teach them not to do it until the subject is unarmed, until he's cooperative and doesn't have weapons in his immediate control. There is no safe way to approach somebody who has weapons in their hands. And not to say that that is never done. In SWAT, we had to do it all the time. When there was a hostage situation and somebody's life is in immediate jeopardy, you have to go in and you have to deal with it. You have to approach a subject who has weapons in his hands. But if it's one officer, one suspect, there is no safe way to approach somebody who has weapons in his hands.
Now, what do you teach officers about allowing a person who is armed with an edge weapon to leave the inner perimeter?
Well, the first series of photos that you saw there, where with the individual in the bathrobe and the knife who is walking down the sidewalk, that's a very graphic example of why you don't let somebody with a weapon exit that inner perimeter, because in that scenario he crashed through into a house and did damage to some innocent people.
Now, to be clear, is it fair to say that all of the testimony you've provided here today is consistent with the training that you gave to those cadet classes that you taught in your class called Edge Weapons Awareness?
That's correct.
May I take a moment to confirm?
Yeah.
Those are my questions. Past the witness.
I don't have any questions, Your Honor. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Sergeant.
Good afternoon.
We heard you talk about how important distance is, and that's a point you really want to drive home with your cadets. Is that right?
That's true. Unfortunately, a lot of times in police work, you don't have the luxury of creating that distance, but it is an optimum situation, correct?
When you do have the option of creating distance, you should use that, shouldn't you?
You should, yes.
Yes. And let me ask you something. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. We heard that you provided training to Mr. Perez's class. You never trained Mr. Sandy, did you?
Not to my knowledge. I believe he came through a lateral class that didn't go through my class. as I
Correct. He
recall.
went through the academy in 1996, which was before your class. Is that right?
I'm not sure.
As far as you know, you did not teach him. Is that right?
I have no knowledge of it.
Okay. In the clips that we just saw, when you talked about the Tueller drill, you said Tueller rule, but it's not really a rule. Is that right?
Correct.
It's a principle.
Yeah, it's a concept.
It's a concept, and it's the idea that it takes 21 seconds, and the idea is that the officer does not have his or her weapon drawn. Is that right?
Correct. In that drill, the officer has a holstered weapon.
Right. So it's the time for it would take the officer to, first of all, it assumes one thing, that somebody's running at the officer. Is that right?
Correct. They're covering that distance to get to the officer.
By running.
Correct.
Right. And that's the time it would take for the officer to draw their weapon from their holster, aim it, and get 2 shots off to center mass. Is that right?
Also including the reactionary time of the officer to recognize that situation and then begin reacting to it. Yes.
And the reactionary time is different when your weapon is already drawn. Is that right?
I would disagree. I would say the reactionary time mentally for an individual to recognize the threat and then react to it would be fairly close to the same.
You think it takes the same amount of time? You disagree that there's a difference in your reactionary time when you already have your gun drawn versus when you have your gun holstered?
If you're referring to getting rounds on target, I would agree with you that it's going to be faster if you have the gun out. But as far as the mental process of recognizing the threat and then beginning to respond to it, it would be very similar.
I understand. Thank you. In one of the clips we saw, the man had sort of a larger weapon and he's running at officers. That's the one where the officers were surrounding the man in a bathrobe, it looked like. Is that right?
Yes.
And that person was holding their edged weapon, looked sort of like an ice pick, but I don't know what it was, and running this way toward the officers. Is that right?
I couldn't see if he was running or not because they were still photos, but yes, he was holding it in what's called a reverse grip or an ice pick grip, as you said.
Okay. And the running was the imminence of the danger. That was the example in that clip, wasn't it?
The danger was him with the knife in his hand, refusing to obey the officers.
And running at them.
I couldn't tell if he was running at them or not. He was running down the sidewalk, obviously, judging from the progression of the still photos.
All right. And I heard you say that you assume someone whose hands you cannot see, you should assume they have something in their hands that will hurt you. Is that right?
Correct. That's basic officer survival.
Okay, that doesn't mean that if I have my hand in my pocket, somebody can shoot me. If they can't see, an officer can shoot me if he can't see my hand, does it?
No.
And officers are given training, are they not, in handling people who are in crisis?
Correct.
And they routinely have to encounter people who are in crisis as police officers. Is that right?
Those who work the street, yes.
It's part of their job.
Yes.
And they get training in disarming people who have edged weapons, don't they?
That was no training that I ever gave personally, and that's not training that I would recommend. Disarming somebody hand to hand who has a knife in their hand is not something I would recommend doing.
Okay. In your video that defense just played, do you have clips where you show cadets how to disarm somebody with a knife or an edged weapon?
I don't teach disarming an edged weapon because you're going to get cut. If somebody has a weapon, an edged weapon in their hand and you're trying to get it away from them, you're going to get cut and possibly fatally cut. What I teach is worst case scenario where you're within arm's reach, somebody pulls out a knife, how to block that knife, push them, create distance to where you can go to a lethal option if need be.
All right, let's go to that clip. Your Honor, may we have the podium HDMI? This is from your training video.
Your baton is is already out. You'll have to rely on physical control at 5 feet or less.
That's a clip from your video, is that right?
Yes, there were certain techniques in that video, which was a very old video, that I told the students as I was showing the video were old school and there are better ways to deal with it now. So I taught them the more modern techniques of dealing with these situations versus the ones on the video. There are certain things, if I could interject real quick, that I really liked about this video, and that's why I used it in this class, but there were other things that were very outdated in it, like
Right.
these hand-to-hand techniques.
Right, and this is the video that you just testified that you showed your class that was approved by the New Mexico Department of Public Safety, isn't that right?
Yes, with the explanation that I gave right now to the students.
Okay. And in that clip, there was one-to-one. The officer had not had his weapon drawn, is that right? And he was able to disarm the person who was attacking him with a knife, is that right?
Yes, the actor who had a knife, yes.
Yeah. Well, all of these people are actors.
Correct.
Oh, okay. And you show another clip in there where, and you talked a little bit about mental patients. They can be unpredictable, is that right?
Correct.
People with mental illness, correct?
Correct.
And that doesn't mean you can shoot somebody just because they have a mental illness and you think they might be unpredictable, is that right?
Of course not.
Or just because they have knives.
If that's a loaded question. If somebody has a knives and they've got the intents, the means, and the opportunity to do you or somebody else lethal damage or great bodily harm, then you do have the right.
All right. Not just because they have a mental illness and knives, is that right?
If they're at a safe distance
Okay.
with knives and not posing a threat to yourself or
I'm
anyone
sorry.
else.
Release your sidearm or baton.
Sorry. I'm sorry, sir. Unless they're a threat to you, you can't shoot them. Is that
Or
what you said?
someone else.
All right. And I cut off the gory part of this video from your training video. But this is a video with somebody also with an edged weapon, glass, and leaning forward. Is that right? This is a video that you also use. You have a mental patient video in your, or clip in your video. Is that right?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Sure. Let me show you. You want the tape time?
I'd like to see what you're showing.
Okay, I'll show you. It's the video. The time. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Unless they have it.
They do. It's from them.
I
It's
don't have
it's time 1:04:59 to 1:05:15.
Can I see it on yours? Sure. Is that where you stopped me?
And having been joined to Mr. Bregman, may we approach?
Okay.
there's another clip that you use in your training video, Sergeant, about unarming somebody with an edged weapon. And the officer is able to disarm the person with the edged weapon, isn't that right?
I'm not sure what you're referring to as far as the video goes.
Sure, I'll show you.
Come on. Come on. You two. Come on. You two. Come on. Come on. You two. The baton is not a distractor.
That's a video from your training class, is that right?
That's correct.
And in that clip, there were 3 officers, is that right?
I believe so.
And 1 person with an edged weapon.
Correct.
And officers are trained, are they not, to take people into custody who have a knife without killing them. Is that right?
Not if they have the knife in their hand. As far as if they have a knife in their hand and they're a threat, I teach not to approach them from the basic officer training level. And this is another one of the videos that I carefully explained that there are much better techniques of dealing with this scenario. And this is a great example of it, how we have more modern techniques now with tasers and long-range tasers. We've got dogs, OC flashbangs that can help distract an individual like this to where they will drop the weapon and then make it safe to approach that weapon
Right.
or that person.
And those are the things that you should take before you approach that person, is that right?
Using these less lethal options, yes, to make sure that weapon is no longer a threat to the officers.
And if you haven't, you can, in your training you teach, create distance until you have the opportunity to get what you need to the encounter, isn't that right?
I teach creating that distance until the person is safe enough to approach and place into custody.
Okay. Can I have a moment? No further questions. Thank you.
Redirect?
I have no further questions. May the witness be excused?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Has the council approached before I go today? understands our anticipated schedule. We will not be conducting trial on Monday. So Monday is a break, and I saw some smiles. Tuesday we'll reconvene. I'll have you come back at 8:20. I know that initially when we were anticipating the schedule, it looked like we would complete all the evidence on Tuesday, but it looks more like Thursday, maybe Friday. So I'm sorry that we didn't gauge that correctly. There were some things that caused some delays beyond people's control. And again, it's just not an exact science, so I appreciate your patience with us trying to gauge this the best we can. So again, just don't discuss the case with any other jurors or with any other person, and please do not allow anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence. Do not conduct any independent research by any means about any of the parties involved or the topics involved, and do not visit the scene of the incident. I've mentioned each day that you're to avoid any publicity about the case. We're getting towards the end, and if possible, I'd like for you to avoid all news accounts. If there's news accounts that you are interested in, if you can have friends or family record that for you, just try to isolate yourself from the news completely. And don't read, listen to, or watch any news accounts of the trial. Don't express any opinion about the case or